Hello everybody, this is Fernando for the latest Gruesome and Grotesque video. As always, I just do these videos randomly when I come across something that I read online, either through the Google News website or through another website altogether that I feel should be placed here within this playlist, such as this case with this rather sad, tragic, and ultimately gruesome ending for a man who ended up actually being trapped within a shopping mall, and he was stayed there pretty much for several weeks until his body was found afterward. It's something where I had to reread the information several times just to make sure how this could happen, but apparently it did. And in fact, you're looking at a picture of the poor man here. His name was Bernard Gore, and he was known as the man who was trapped inside a Westfield shopping mall. So let's go ahead and let's talk about this news article here. I'll feature all the information I can because it's been a few years now, so there's some information to share from when it first happened to afterward, and then I'll give my own thoughts and opinions on it too. So here's essentially what occurred. So again, it's been a couple of years. You have to go back actually to January 2017 for when this all happened. I believe the exact date was January 6th, if I'm not mistaken. And this gentleman here, Bernard Gore, was 71 years old at the time. So the way that this tale goes, apparently before this incident happened, he and his wife had gone over to a relative's, I believe it was the daughter's residence. They went from one city to another to stay there during that time period. And it was known that at that time that Mr. Gore would go on walks. Apparently he would go from certain places to another, presumably nearby to wherever he was staying at the time. And such was the case here. On this day as well, he was going to go take a walk over from that residence he was staying at to the Westfield Shopping Center, and then he was going to meet up with those relatives, I believe his wife, and then also his daughter later on that afternoon as well. So he ended up taking that walk. I didn't read anywhere else what it said that he drove. Part of it involved this as well. Unfortunately, Mr. Gore was suffering from dementia during that time period. I don't know if this was something where it was constant or it would come and go in spurts, but either way though, this could explain why he would take those walks as opposed to travel or drive, in other words, or at least have someone drive him to another place. But in this situation, he was there just going for the walk and everything was a-okay. So it was January 6th, specifically at 12:30, that he left that residence. He apparently had $30 with him, a travel card. I think it was a credit card of some sort, and then that was it. I didn't think I read anywhere that said that he had a cell phone with him, although that may not have proven much use afterward. More on that here in a moment. And so he went on that walk over to the mall, and then based on what employees were stating, at a certain point, Mr. Gore started to suffer from that dementia. And in fact, some of the employees there, including one at a Chanel store, stated that she in turn saw this elderly man walk into her shop asking for help. And she said that he had this completely lost and confused look on him. It was almost like a bewildering stare, like he was, as she placed it, it was frail and confused, and he was pacing up and down the store. And so he was asking someone if they could help him, and then when they offered to help him, apparently he then just shook his head and then wandered off. This Chanel store plays more here in just a moment too, because of the location associated with it. That was the last that the poor employee saw. She was still concerned for him though, and so she ended up calling security. The guards came over, and then they stated that they would check some of the CCTV footage and some of the areas around as well to see if they could find him. But unfortunately, they never did, at least at that time. Whatever had happened to Mr. Gore, no one knew because he essentially disappeared. And so when that time period came for his wife and his daughter to meet with him at another place, he wasn't there, and then give it a little bit more time, and then they realized that something was wrong, and so they decided to call the police. And then that's when a true search started to occur to find out what happened to Mr. Gore, and they ended up looking at a lot of locations there within that mall. Apparently, that mall is huge. Somebody let me know too if you live by that area and know about that location, the Westfield Shopping Center. I think it's 3 or 4 floors, and then there's several, like a basement, parking areas, underground, stuff like that. I think it's a total of 6 floors altogether. Well, they ended up looking for him throughout that area, but they couldn't find him at all. Mr. Gore had basically just disappeared off the face of the earth. And so what turned out to be several days ended up being several weeks. And then also the son of Mr. Gore ended up traveling over there as well, trying to see if they could find him. What makes this even more tragic is that the story goes there was an incident that Mr. Gore had shortly before this incident as well, where he was supposed to be at a certain location, but he ended up not being there for several hours. And so they had asked him, they had told him, hey, let me go ahead and we'll give you a little tracker. So that way, if something like this happens again, then at least we'll be able to find you. But he had in turn stated no, he didn't want that to be with him for whatever reason. And so that was not included with him. But that could have been obviously a world of difference when it comes to this situation. In fact, it was his son, Mark, who ended up traveling over there to try to find him this go around, who had mentioned that repeat of the episode a little while back as well. Scary, scary stuff. So, and this is a time period where apparently the temperature was getting more hotter and hotter. So people were thinking that he could be outside. He could actually be somewhere there in the outside area, wilderness, who knows where, just lost or trapped, not being able to find, his way out. But as it turns out, and this is where, again, things just turn so, so tragic. Cut to about 3 weeks later, towards the end of January, and he is found. But he wasn't anywhere outside of the mall. In fact, it was on the 4th level of an area called the Westfield Bondi Junction. That's where his body was found. So he was actually still within that mall the entire time period, but he had passed away within that stairwell. Isn't that just so sad, so tragic, so creepy at the same time too? Because here's essentially what happens. That stairwell, again, is big. This is a huge, huge place. And it's got those levels that I was mentioning as well, lots of entrances and exits. But as it turns out, that stairwell, whenever you utilize it, the door shuts behind you. That's it. It is locked. It is absolutely locked unless you have one of those keys, meaning you would have to be one of the employees, one of the maintenance personnel there. Then the door doesn't open, nor apparently is there an option to try to force it open, like either break a lock or anything like that. Somebody let me know if you have more information on that, to see if there's any kind of way that this gentleman would have had any opportunity, because I'm getting the picture that when the door closes, then that's it. There's nothing you can grab to force it open. It's almost like it's sealed shut. So couple that with an endless almost set of stairwell. Again, this is going up to like 6 levels altogether, and he is watching and going up and down and then seeing all these exits, but no exits that he can actually exit from, and then nothing that he's realizing that there's no people coming and going through this location. The implication that I got is that this area is rarely used. It's supposed to be mainly for emergencies, or maybe something along the lines of routine inspections, which is even further tragic stuff, because if you would have gotten lost again within a more populated area, it would have been just hours as opposed to weeks later. And then also couple that with his dementia, which was, for all intents and purposes, probably at its fullest extent right there. And then there he was, just endlessly wandering throughout the stairwells, thinking that the next exit, like corner, would be the one that would allow him to exit. Maybe there's a door there, but there's no way to be able to get out. The one thing I don't know is why Mr. Gore wasn't pounding on one of those doors, or at least trying to get attention, because here's where things get even more tragic. Remember, I was mentioning earlier, pay attention about that Chanel store, because as it turns out, that location was the location behind that area that's where his body was found. So he wasn't actually very far from where the initial employees had seen him originally. The one that was again mentioning that he had that confused face, like that confused expression on him. He was actually very close by. And in fact, when his wife was also there trying to search for him too, at one point it's estimated that they were just several meters away from each other at that location. That's how close they were. That's how easily accessible he could have been to them and vice versa, but it just never happened. For whatever reason, he again did not pound on any of those doors. He just kept either presumably going up and down the stairwell, and then finally at a certain point, again, I think it was at that fourth floor area, that's where his body was found. There was a chair. He just presumably sat down on that chair, and then that was it. He ended up passing away sometime around there. And in fact, his body, his decomposed body, at that point was found by that chair. It is presumed that eventually his body just fell over. And then that's essentially the last of Mr. Gore right at that location. What's crazy is that at that Westfield shopping center, the articles I was reading was highlighting two more scenarios where this almost happened to other people. Same thing. People didn't realize that those doors just lock shut right behind them whenever they go into the door, and then there's very little way for them to be able to communicate with anyone else. Because the other thing is this too, remember I was mentioning about the cell phone. If he would have had it, there would have been very little chance for that cell phone to have caused any relief, because one of those other examples was a woman who did have her cell phone with her, but she realized all that concrete, all those levels of concrete meant there was so few bars of reception, if any, that only at one point did she get really lucky and finally capture some kind of reception, that she in turn used it to look up the phone number there for that Westfield shopping center, called, was transferred to the personnel there, like the security, and they were able to walk her into that area. As it turns out, the only ways in and out of that stairwell when everything is locked, like in this scenario with Mr. Gore, was you have to go to the very, very top or the very, very bottom. Those are the only two doors that apparently actually opened, unless if you didn't have anything involving those keys and so on. So that's how lucky that lady was. And then in the other scenario, there was a gentleman who also somehow ended up getting lost within those stairwells. And in his case, it may have been actually because he fell. He fell, and then his body rolled several times, and then he hit his head on something. And it was only by pure luck there was maintenance that was checking things. I think it was 2 or 3 days later, and then that's where they found him. He was still alive, but just barely. But they found him, and then he was rescued and then recuperated afterward. But that's pretty much it. That's the story, the gruesome and grotesque story with this gentleman again, this Mr. Bernard Gore. Condolences, as always, to the family about this situation. What a horrible way to go. You would never think that that could happen to somebody, but it did. Just getting endlessly trapped within this type of maze, if you could call it that, there at the shopping center, thinking that you have a way to get out. How easy would it be, right? There's the doors, but you can't. For whatever reason, almost in a weird way, there's no way to communicate outside. Nobody can hear you, and nobody's going to access it for so long. It's almost like the worst possible situation or circumstances all at once. Crazy stuff. But let me know what you guys and gals think about this situation. All right, everybody. Thanks again as always. Take care. Bye.